So yesterday, Netanyahu arrived in D.C. for what the Times of Israel called hastily arranged talks with Trump about tariffs, hostages, and more. And nominally, the idea was the Trump tariff plan included 17% tariffs on Israel, even though the Israelis anticipating these tariffs said, oh, don't worry, we're not going to put up any more tariffs against your products. Can you imagine the audacity of that? We've been funding their military. We automatically give them $4 billion every year under an agreement negotiated on the way out by Obama and Netanyahu. And then on top of that, when they have new wars, we pass by a huge bipartisan margin, massive new funding that we send to them to pay for their wars, to pay for their military. Some of that military aid, a good amount of it, the $4 million every year, has to be used to buy American weapons, but not all of it. They can spend it on what they want. All as Israelis have a higher standard of living than millions of Americans in terms of access to health care and college, subsidized education, but the American worker nonetheless is forced to subsidize them. And then at the same time that we're doing that, and constantly using our veto at the UN to protect them, they're putting tariffs against American products so that they keep their American products out of our market. So this was in anticipation of what the meeting was supposed to be. Quote, the meeting will largely focus on the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip and the hostages, of whom 59 are still in captivity, as well as Trump's new tariff policy, under which Israel goods face a 17% U.S. tariff. Netanyahu's office has also said that, quote, the Israeli-Turkey relations, the Iranian threat, and confronting the International Criminal Court will be on the agenda. Trump told reporters on Sunday, quote, we're going to talk about trade. We're going to talk about the obvious subject. You know what the obvious subject is, right? Obviously meaning Iran. This was interpreted in Israel as likely referring either to the hostages held in Gaza or to Iran's nuclear program. The premier departed, the Israeli premier, from Washington from Budapest on Sunday, less than 24 hours after the trip was announced. There's two interesting issues there, too, that I just want to point out. One is that when the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for war crimes, everyone in Europe stood up and cheered. This is what the ICC is for. And small countries that are signatories to the ICC felt obligated to honor it, even if they didn't agree with it. For example, the South African government was hosting a BRICS summit in Johannesburg, long planned. BRICS, of course, is a counter-alliance to, you could call it, to the G7, maybe even to NATO eventually, that has as its founding countries Brazil, South Africa, India, China, and Russia. And the South Africans said, we can't host Vladimir Putin on our soil because we're signatories to the ICC. And even though we don't agree that he should have been indicted, he was. And therefore, if he comes here, we'll have to turn him over to The Hague. Same thing happened with, this year, there's a G20 meeting in Rio de Janeiro coming up shortly. And Lula, the president of Brazil, was asked, would you allow Vladimir Putin, who's obviously an important part, to come? He's an important partner of Brazil's as well. And at first Lula said, yeah, of course he can come. We don't agree with the ICC warrant. And then a lot of pressure was put on Lula, and then eventually he sort of backtracked. So the ICC is considered sacrosanct. The US government praised the ICC too when it indicted Putin. The minute the ICC indicted Netanyahu and his former defense secretary, Yoav Gallant, along with multiple Hamas leaders who they said are responsible for the planning of October 7th, suddenly the ICC became irrelevant. Hungary said, we're going to pull out of the ICC because they let Netanyahu come and visit despite the arrest warrant. But also when Netanyahu had to fly from Hungary to Washington, 3 different signatories of the ICC in Europe, including France, Italy, and Spain, gave him overflight rights, even though they're ICC signatories. They say the ICC is so important. They all just make exceptions for Israel. Now, it's possible that because Netanyahu's flight pattern to the U.S. was somewhat odd, it didn't go through northern Europe and around that circular route over Canada that normally would take place. There was speculation that maybe some countries said you can't fly over our country. But when Israel is indicted by the ICC, everything changes. The U.S. government wants to punish the ICC. Some countries are threatening to remove it. France says, we don't care about the ICC anymore, now that it's Netanyahu. When Netanyahu visited the White House the first time in February, there was a lot of commentary about the fact that when Netanyahu went to sit down, Trump pulled out his chair like some kind of overly accommodating waiter and stood there behind Netanyahu's chair and held his chair and then pushed it in for Netanyahu, which is a very odd thing for Trump to do. Usually he's very devoted to showing who's the boss. He grabs the arms and hands of foreign leaders and shakes them right next to him. Whereas this was, quite subservient. There you see Trump waiting and then pushing in Netanyahu's chair as he sits down, kind of smiling. That was the first time. And then yesterday, there you see Trump doing exactly the same thing. There's just not even 2 months later, Trump playing the role of the waiter. There's Netanyahu sitting down. Trump holds his chair, pushes it in, kind of just walks away as Netanyahu smirks, starts writing things and signing things. Now, there is one other time that Trump did this, which was for when the Indian Prime Minister Modi visited Washington. Trump loves Modi. But, India is the largest, most populous country on earth, the most populous country on earth, the most populous democracy on earth. They're a massive country. Israel is not, but this is just symbolic of the American-Israel relationship. There you see the tariffs that were supposedly the cause of Netanyahu's visit, and you see there in the orange highlighted that Israel, the government claims that Israel has, it's not really a 33% tariff, it's more how the government calculates what they consider trade unfairness based on the trade deficit they have with Israel. And then they kind of cut in half that number to determine the new tariffs imposed on Israel. And so it was a 17% tariff imposed on Israel. And even though Israel withdrew its tariffs, which again, I'm amazed that they had, it's such audacity, knowing that Trump was going to impose this tariff scheme, Trump's position, not just with Israel, but with everybody, we'll see if he holds it with Israel, is that simply eliminating tariffs is not sufficient. It doesn't alleviate the past and the trade deficit that has been accumulated. And he says the trade deficit is proof that these countries aren't treating us fairly. And so they need to not just get rid of their tariffs, they need to promise to invest in the U.S., to open factories in the U.S. That's what Trump is demanding of all these countries. But here was a part of their, they were going to have a formal press conference, they didn't, but instead they had kind of a press meeting in the Oval Office. And here's what Trump said when the issue of tariffs came up.
Do you plan to reduce the tariffs that your government put on Israeli goods, 70%?
On where?
On Israeli goods, the 70%. Do you plan
Well, we're talking about a whole new trade. Maybe not. Maybe not. Don't forget, we help Israel a lot. We give Israel $4 billion a year. That's a lot. Congratulations, by the way. That's pretty good. But we give Israel billions of dollars a year. Billions.
So, it is true. And I guess Trump was sort of offended, as he should be, that Israel is imposing tariffs. Now we'll see, given how many people are upset about the imposition of tariffs on Israel specifically. Here, for example, is Ben Shapiro responding to and commenting on Trump's tariff policy. And you'll never guess what he was angry about. You'll never guess. I could give you 1,000 guesses. I could give you 2 months to try and figure it out. You'll never figure out what Ben Shapiro was specifically angry about with these tariffs.
Yesterday, Israel announced 0 tariffs on any American goods. The Trump administration hit them with a 17% tariff anyway, claiming that they had a 33% tariff rate on American goods, which clearly is not true. Why? Because it turns out that we buy more stuff from the Israelis than the Israelis buy from us. Shocker. They're a smaller country. We're a giant market. Not a giant shock, as it turns out. So this is pretty crazy. I have friends, for example, who import product to the United States and then sell them. Why? Because they can't get the product in the United States. So, for example, I have a friend who's in the jewelry business. And this friend in the jewelry...
Sometimes I actually get uncomfortable with how people like Ben Shapiro just seem to fulfill stereotypes so perfectly. Ben Shapiro, I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn, has a friend who's in the jewelry business, and he imports a lot from Israel, a lot, as he's going to explain.
Friend who's in the jewelry business. And this friend in the jewelry business imports products that are not capable of being manufactured or found in the United States from abroad. So it's not like there's import substitution you can just buy from an American. That's not how it works. This, by the way, this company is an American company. The tariff that is now being applied to all of his imports is like 35, 40%. Those prices will get passed directly on to the consumers if consumption goes down, if investment goes down, because investors are freaked out because they're getting whipsawed like nobody's business. Again, I was talking with investors pretty much all day yesterday, given what was going on. And the number one thing that I was hearing from major investors is, I don't know what the hell is going on. That was the number one thing. Before and after. The amount of confusion, chaos in the markets, a feeling of complete...
So I have no doubt that Ben Shapiro spoke all day the day before with investors. I'm sure he spends a lot of his time speaking to those people. I guess the issue is U.S. policy has been geared toward investors for so long that even if you don't love all of Trump's policy on tariffs, it's probably time to make U.S. policy antagonistic to those people's interests and focus instead on the working class and the downwardly mobile middle class. But you saw what Ben Shapiro's anger was from. Here, too, is another America First stalwart, part of the Trump movement, Bill Ackman. As you might recall, Bill Ackman led a blacklist in late 2023 into 2024, wanting to get hedge fund managers and bankers and law firms together to promise not to hire any students who signed petitions against Israel. Here's what Bill Ackman said on April 2nd. And obviously, he's concerned about a lot of things with these tariffs. He bought $1.8 billion, something like that. Him and his hedge fund did in Nike, which has taken a massive battering in the market since these tariffs were released because Nike produces so much in China and other cheap factories overseas where their labor is paid poorly. But here's one of the things that Bill Ackman was particularly angry about, wrote a tweet to Donald Trump, whose campaign he helped fund, that said the following, quote, "Real Donald Trump should reverse the tariffs on Israel because Israel eliminated their own tariffs prior to today's tariff announcement. Trump should incentivize the behavior he wants, not punish it." Now, it is amazing how much this tiny little country, how much it commands the attention of the American political class. How that's the leader that came twice to the White House in less than 3 months, how we give all this money to them, how we back their wars, how we are constantly talking about what we can do for Israel, punishing people who are critics of Israel in the United States. And then here you have Ben Shapiro and Bill Ackman, two very, very prominent supporters of Israel, looking at Trump's tariff plan and saying, what about Israel? Why are you tariffing Israel? Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.